Hello, everyone, and welcome to Nerding Out on Neurodiversity, the podcast for all things neurodivergence. I'm Dr. Matt Zakreski, clinical psychologist and professional speaker, and I'm happy to be your host through the wild trails of the neurodivergent world.
And I'm Jake Noonan, educational coach and humanities teacher, your co-host and producer, and I'm thrilled to help share the stories and the experiences of wonderful people in the world of neurodiversity.
We're really excited for today's guest, which we are going to say a lot because we're always really excited about every guest we get. So let's get into it. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Nerding Out on Neurodiversity. I'm your host, Dr. Matt Zakreski, clinical psychologist and professional speaker. And with me, as always, is my co-host and production designer, Jake Noonan. Say hi, Jake.
Hi, everybody. Super excited to be here. I'm very, very, very excited for our guest today and everything she has to share with us.
Oh my gosh. I mean, it's a weird thing that happens in this field is that people will email you like, well, you take a look at my book. And it's like, well, sure, I like reading books, and this is a cool way to read what my colleagues are up to. And many of them are good, and some of them are less good. But every so often you come across one that's like, where was this book 10 years ago when I needed it? So the person who wrote that book is here with us today. Hi, Deb.
Hi, Dr. Matt. Hi, Jake. Very nice to be with you gentlemen today.
It's a real treat for us. Deb, can you tell our listeners what is it you do and how long have you been doing it?
Okay, so my background has been in education for over 35 years. I started teaching elementary school and then noticed that the really high potential kids in my classrooms were not getting the attention they needed and seemed like they were the ones missing out the most. And I made a little transition and started working in the gifted ed population of school districts. I've taught in rural environments, urban, suburban, 3 different states. I've really had a good cross section of different types of students that I've worked with in all of these different places. And then I became a new grandmother and yay. And so I wanted to give my daughter and son-in-law the opportunity to lean on their maternal grandparents a little bit. And so I left teaching in the classroom. I could have certainly stayed there several more years. I just love working with students of all ages. Decided to start a consulting business. So I started Smart Strategies and continued to work with parents that I'd worked with in school districts and help them navigate the bumpy road that they often find when discussing their child's gifted, twice exceptional needs and how they're not being met in their school districts. And that was a big part of my job as a school teacher. I not only worked with students, but I was a big advocate and support for the parents of those children. So I just continued that path. And I also do professional development and speaking engagements on gifted traits, social emotional needs, twice exceptionality, neurodiversity, and so forth. So I'm still, keeping my feet in the pond, so to speak. I just am not working directly with children, but I love it. And then speaking with you and writing the second book has been a real joy that I never expected. How they say, don't ever say never.
Well, I mean, that's so true. And I want to ask about the book, but a question popped into my brain. There are so many educational consultants now, right? Like,
yes,
you can trip over some of them on LinkedIn.
Right.
But you're uniquely positioned because you were a classroom teacher.
Yes.
You've been behind that desk. When I do my consulting work, people sometimes are like, oh, you must hate public education. I'm like, the furthest thing from it. I was a public school kid. Jake was a public school kid, right? We absolutely we want the system to be better.
Right.
How do you think your experience differentiates you from other consultants?
Great question, Matt. And that's really how I thought about it as well, that the parents that come to me now, and I've gained some international clients, which was a big surprise because I wanted that to happen, but I also didn't know how school districts overseas worked with their gifted and TUI populations. But come to find out, they experience the same types of things that the parents here in America experience. And that is they want someone like me who has been in the trenches. Even if I don't teach, I haven't taught in Switzerland or Beirut, Lebanon, or Mexico City. I bring to the table advocacy and support with the type of questions that these parents need to think about. That I'm a public school advocate as well, and I hold educators in the highest of esteem. But there are situations in schools where parents need to be prepared for a bit of a battle. And I'm kind of like, I don't want to say a sergeant. My last name's Gennarelli. And one of my fourth graders one time said, I remember how to say your name because you're like general in an army. So I kind of grabbed onto that. And I thought, you know what? I am kind of helping support these parents go into a battle that sometimes they experience. And with my knowledge and experience in so many different diverse settings, that they really appreciate an honest point of view. Because I think sometimes when they first contact me, Matt, they maybe think that because I was a former teacher, I'm going to, I don't want to say side with the teachers in the classroom, because I have had several confrontations with regular ed teachers over some practices that have been not so favorable to gifted and TUI kids. So these parents appreciate my honesty, my perspective, my experience, the diverse range of ages and backgrounds. So I think that that's what's unique about my perspective. I have walked the talk, and I speak from a very honest perspective. They don't have to guess that I'm just doing this to get my name out there or to make money or any of those things. That is far from it. I have never been, if you're in education to make money, as people say, you're in the wrong field, because over 35 years, salaries have not gone up a lot since the time I started teaching 35 years ago. So if that's the case, you're in the wrong field. So I think they value my honesty.
I mean, mental health has a similar problem.
Yes.
Right. It's like, I'm changing lives and that's okay. No, that's fine. Yeah, it's good. Yeah. I mean, I think honesty and perspective is what this whole field is about. Right. And that means calling out our colleagues sometimes. I can't tell you how many times I've been in a meeting with a school psychologist saying the same things. It's like, that's bad practice. You are misinformed about this population. Do better. I had a guy say to me years ago, he's like, a kid can't be gifted and autistic. I'm like, what do you think I do Monday through Friday? Like, those are my kids.
Right.
And if you're in a position of power in a school district, it is your moral and ethical and professional obligation to know as much as you can about these things. And if you don't, which is fine, then you have to listen to people like us who can tell you what the actual truth is. So
exactly. I just spoke with a parent yesterday from Maine, and she's going into her first IEP meeting Thursday about her 5-year-old son, who at 4.5 drew a very, very detailed Pascal's triangle, explained it at 4.5. He does 5th grade math. He comprehends at a 4.5, reads and comprehends at a 4.5 range. And she's going into this meeting. And the first question I asked her, Matt, was, who's going to be at the IEP meeting? Do you already know who the members will be? And she's naming them. I said, where's the gifted education specialist? And she said, that person won't be there. And I said, I tilted my head and I said, what? And she said, well, I have to ask what the process is, but he hasn't been identified gifted yet. And I went, I did 2 emails with her and I knew the child was gifted. Now, of course, I have experience in this field, but for a school district not to, they already know his levels. He's been professionally assessed. The data is there, and we're not bringing the gifted ed specialist on board. So I coached her up, and I truly was a general in that moment. I wanted her to know that she must go in as a positive team member, because she's going to be working with the school district for a long time. And you want to go in and be positive. You want to be friendly, but you also don't want to be run over. And for a school district to say, well, this is not our process. We're not sure if he's gifted, and so our specialist is not going to be there. I couldn't wrap my mind around that. So She's calling the principal. She was calling the principal that afternoon and saying she wanted the gifted specialist there. And, you assume parents know these things, Matt, but you have to kind of give them a little nudge, right?
Yep.
A little nudge to know it's okay. And that if you feel like you're rocking the boat, this is your child we're talking about. We rock our boat with our insurance agent and our financial advisor and everybody else we come into contact with. And then when it's our child, our flesh and blood that we would die for, we kind of hesitate. And so going back to my position now as a consultant, I don't stand for that,
And I think parents are so afraid of being looped in with the giant air quotes, those parents.
Exactly.
And I'm like, listen, a big difference between saying, I don't like this is a thing that happened in a school I consult to, where they're like, we don't like that the math teacher is unmarried and living with her boyfriend. And I was like, it's 2024. Is this the town from Footloose? Like, my pop culture reference. I got it in. But I mean, are you kidding me? Like, there's a ocean of difference between that parent and my kid has leveled up to the point where they're at the top of the charts in math. And you're saying you can't give him more math and there's more math out there. Give my kid more math.
Right.
There's a fundamental difference, but schools like to lump all those parents together because
yes,
it makes their jobs easier.
Yes. And that's another thing that's really easy for me to share with parents is that I've sat in so many of these meetings and watched different parents come in and have different points of view about how to posture themselves in these meetings. And so I really guided this parent to hopefully have a better experience and know the kinds of questions to ask, because generally those IEP meetings tend to be rolled. I don't want to say standard because every child's different, but they tend to go through a very select process. And I said, don't let them rush you either. Like, oh, I've got to get back to my classroom if it's not after school or, those kinds of things. So it's extremely important for these families to know that there are people like you and I out there that really deeply, passionately care about them and want to help them raise their children in a very comforting environment. And a good deal of that is in their child's school.
Yeah, it's just the work is so needed right now.
Yeah.
Because the system is complicated. And
Mm-hmm.
and Jake's heard me say this 1,000 times. I've never met a teacher who doesn't want to do right by a kid.
Yeah.
I have often met administrators who don't want to do right by a kid.
Right.
Right. And to my admins out there, I know there's a lot of you doing the good work, right? I mean, we're not lumping you all up in one bucket here.
That's right. We don't paint with a broad brush. No.
No, we can't. We are not blunt instruments. We're scalpels, right? And now I have my Halloween costume.
Being a scalpel?
Blunt instrument on one side, scalpel on the other, right?
Okay.
There you go.
Give my kids nightmares forever. Jake, while I unpack that mental image in my own head, why don't you ask the question?
Well, I have so many questions for you already. And
Yes.
I'm gonna just parse through a couple of things that I wrote down, but one that kept coming up was, since you're doing like broad consulting and you're doing international consulting as well, which is fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say is like some of the best or most important advice or guidance that you end up giving to parents consistently?
To do their homework in terms of researching what their school is capable of doing. And they may not know that certainly without asking lots of questions as they get into the school. For example, a couple of different families that I've been working with they've left the public school system and now they're navigating where to go in a private school setting, whether it be a parochial school or a gifted academy or those types of settings. So they need to do their homework in terms of what is that school willing to offer and what can they offer. And sometimes a website will say something and it certainly doesn't pan out when they get into that scenario. And so the family that I'm working with in Beirut, Lebanon, God bless them because they're under some stress right now.
Yeah.
Worldwide. I emailed them the other day and I'm thinking and praying for them. But nevertheless, they had to remove their son from one school and put him in a different school. And they found out through their research, and I was helping them do research I said, here's some questions you need to ask before you ever enroll your child. And also you need to do some visits, go visit these schools and ask these questions. And even then, some things aren't uncovered until you actually get into the scenario. It's like being hired for a job. You can ask all the right questions, but then you get into that work environment and you're like, oh gosh, I wish I'd known that. Well, you don't know it till you're in it, but you certainly can do your homework as much as possible prior to enrolling your child in a school. And the parent knows their child the very best. So of anybody. So I tell these parents that you need to go in with like your top 3 goals. What would you like for your child to experience in this school setting? The parent in Maine, she said, before we ended our call yesterday, she said, I really would like for my child's social emotional needs to be addressed. So going into this IEP meeting Thursday, she's going to ask that straight up, because those aren't things necessarily that are put in an individual education plan. And so the second thing was I would like for him to be better, strengthen his executive function skills. Great. And the third thing, she wants that acceleration in math and reading since it's already been, the data is very clear and he can sit down and explain to you division and fractions and geometry like my 5th graders. So what I would say to these parents is think about your top 3 goals. I know we want so much, but you also have to remember the schools often are limited. Even a gifted academy can be limited. So, and the other thing I always ask, what kind of staff, how is your staff educated and versed on working with gifted and TUI kids? Do you know much about that? The principal may know about it, but if he or she does not educate their staff about it, then that's going to be a real problem. So I would say goal setting before you ever enter a school. What do I really want this school to do for my child? And then ask, is it possible? And if it is, then who on the staff is very knowledgeable about working with children like my child? We have many teachers who have special ed backgrounds, but even there, and gifted ed and 2E is under that special ed umbrella, but even there, I've found that regular ed classroom teachers, even to this day, and I wrote about it in my first book, colleges and universities do not have courses in gifted and 2E that, unless you're working at a master's level. So therefore, like when I came out of school, even then, even now, we just don't see a lot of teachers with knowledge about that. And I want to go off on a tangent here, but unfortunately that leads to the myths about gifted and 2E kids and how we should react to them and how we should service them. So parents just need to be ready to ask lots of questions and not be afraid to ask those questions. If you don't ask the questions, you are going to find yourself, as I said, it's like planning a trip to New York City. If you don't plan that trip to New York City, you're going to find yourself probably in some bumpy areas. Transportation, hotel-wise, where am I eating? What part of towns am I going to that are safe and not safe? Trying to get tickets to venues that I want to go to. If I don't plan those kinds of things, it probably is not going to be a real happy trip. Same thing with planning for your kids. If I know my child is reading at a 3rd grade level and he's 4.5 and 5, and he's doing a Pascal's triangle and explaining to me and the patterns, the repetition in it, then I know going into my elementary school, I better be prepared to ask, have you ever had a kid like mine before? and be ready for, teachers always think, oh, here comes another one of those parents talking to me about their kids gifted. But I make sure these parents are ready with anecdotal stories. All you have to do is tell some administrators and teachers some anecdotal stories about your child from the ages of 3 to 5, and you're in. You're in.
It's funny, right? Since so many neurodivergent kids have neurodivergent parents, and we all know how a lot of neurodivergent people feel about planning, right?
That's right.
I don't have to have a plan. It's New York City. I'll just go. Broadway, Hell's Kitchen, Brooklyn is a thing, Coney Island. Who couldn't figure that out?
Right.
And then you get there, you realize you don't know when things are open. You don't know what subways take you what places. And you're trying to go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art on a Tuesday when it's closed, when you could have gone to the History Museum.
Right.
I always encourage my clients not to think about things in terms of good and bad, but think about things about like how close can we get to our goal?
Yes.
The more we do, the closer we get to our goal.
Yes.
You can have a great time in New York City without a plan. You'll almost certainly have a better time in New York City if you have a plan.
Yes. Yeah. I kind of think too, Matt, since the pandemic, what my husband and I have noticed, we're big fans of the Outer Banks in North Carolina. And so we went there after the pandemic had kind of passed and things were kind of getting back in order. But every time we try to go to a restaurant, we're like, oh, they're closed Monday and Tuesday. Oh, they're closed Wednesday, Thursday, but they're open Monday, Tuesday, Friday. And we were jumping all over the Outer Banks area from the north to south end. And, it was a lot of issues. It was, can't get the employees, can't, get the foods, the products that it was just a whole plethora of things that we had never even thought about. And I parallel that with parents, as I said, getting into schools with their first child, second child, and they just don't have any idea what they're getting into when their child is neurodiverse. It's just a real eye opener for them, kind of deer in the headlights, so to speak.
I mean, those deer in the headlights moments are far too common, unfortunately.
No,
It's just so hard, right?
it is.
And I would guess that bridging that gap between what parents don't know and what they don't know is part of the reason for your book.
Yes.
You mind telling us about it?
Well, the first book I wrote was, and I posture it because the first book was about twice exceptional boys. And as I was still teaching K-8, working in gifted ed, I just noticed all these twice exceptional boys coming across my path. And not that I didn't service twice exceptional girls, but I did. But the boys just kept coming at me fast and furious. So I kind of dug down a little deeper, like, what is going on here? And so I wrote about 4 specific students that I'd worked with over a long period of time. A couple of them I still know today as adults. But what happened a couple of years ago was on LinkedIn, a gentleman reached out to me and he had seen I had worked with twice exceptional students, and he was also looking for someone who had written a book before. And so I kind of ticked those 2 boxes for him. And so we've talked on the phone a few times, and he was interested in writing about his story, so to speak. And he didn't really want it to be a memoir, but because he's still a very young guy, but he knew he couldn't take on the organization and the writing. He's dyslexic. He's got some other, he's autistic, highly gifted. I could just go down the list. But as soon as I heard his story and he started talking to me, I thought, you are the adult version of these boys I've worked with for so long. And I started realizing his story needs to get out there because he was not diagnosed 2E until he was 45. Particularly, I mean, he knew he was really smart. No one ever called him gifted or used that term. His dad was a doctor. The whole family was smart. But the autistic part of it and the dyslexic part of it really was not a conversation. He ended up getting married, and what brought him to a psychologist in Dallas for a formal diagnosis was his marriage was it was about to tank, as he'll say. And so after about 3 days of extensive assessments, his psychologist looked at him and said, you know what, John, you're autistic, you're on the spectrum. And actually his marriage counselor said that too, like I think you're on the spectrum, because he and his wife were going at such different ways. Well, men and women are wired differently to begin with, but this was a whole nother level. So as he and I started working together, I really didn't know what that was going to look like because I've not co-written a book with anyone, let alone someone who is on the spectrum. And so even though I'd worked with autistic children, working with John was a whole nother level. And it just turned out to be the most amazing experience ever. It was like divine intervention. And to learn about his life and how he realized after being diagnosed, it just made the world open up. And I have a lot of parents say this as well. Oh, now I know why my child is sensitive and highly intuitive, and go down the list. And, even though some people don't like terms or labels, it gave them something to hang on to. My child's gifted. Oh, now I know why they're behaving this way or need this. Same with John. He realized at 45 that I'm highly gifted. That's what this means. I'm autistic. I'm dyslexic. I have OCD. And now he's going down these different identified disorders, or as he calls them, differences. I'm not allowed to call them disorders. Differences, and they are. He now knows how to help himself. He knows how to get help for certain things in his life. And he and his wife are doing so much better. They didn't divorce, yay. So, navigating neurodiversity truly is a story of love, but it's, as you read it, Matt, it's kind of sandwiched in with other information for people. We had to figure out who our audience was, and our audience are people who are either suspect they're neurodiverse, they're not really sure. Maybe they live with someone who they suspect is neurodiverse, and also people, for example, employers that are thinking about changing the way they interview possible employees, or people they come across they're like, gosh, that person's really smart, but gosh darn, they're awfully quirky. What's that all about? So it really is for a wide variety of audience to gather information and go, oh, this is really a great thing. It's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. And let me learn about it, right? Because the more information you have about something, the more educated you are, the more open your mind becomes, right? Isn't that a great thing when your mind's open? So that's kind of where it came from. And yeah, so here we are now talking about it. And as you know, writing is a process. And it's like, as a woman, I just call it like birthing a baby, because you love it so much, and then it's finally here, and now you're nurturing it and talking about it and seeing it go out into the world and do good things.
And tell me, like, just writer to writer here, how did you capture his voice so well? Because I'm sitting there being like, I felt like he was sitting in my desk next to me talking. Like, what was that process like?
Well, I told him from the very beginning, I said, if we're going to do this, John, I have to have access to you on a daily basis. I know you have other stuff going on. At the time we wrote this, he had an extensive business background, but at the time we wrote this, he was actually working teaching in a high school for twice exceptional kids in Moab, Utah. He lives in Durango. So he'd drive the 2 hours to Moab and teach at this high school. So he said, sure, as long as I'm not in a class or anything, and you need me, I will call you or we'll FaceTime or whatever. So we talked probably at least 4 times a week, either on the phone or Zoom calls or whatever, because as much as I can plan an outline for a book or a chapter and things like that, stuff like you said, Matt, stuff will come into your head, and like, I want to know right now, like, oh, we're talking about relationships, and how was that dating in high school? I don't want to let it go. So he and I would talk about it. I'm taking copious notes, and I'm recording and doing all this, gathering all this information. But then the course just starts changing again, So, but the one thing was, I just had to have access to him, and he agreed to it, and it worked out beautifully, because I can't, it's his voice, and that is his voice. So I'm glad you said that. He'll be happy to hear that, it's John. I mean, you can read that middle part of the book and meet him in person and go, God, John, I already feel like I know you.
No, I mean, absolutely. Right. And that's a testament to his bravery and vulnerability.
Yes.
And also talent as a writer, right? To combine that and making something beautiful out of it. So bravo to both.
Yeah. Thank you.
Jake, you look like you're chomping at the bit to ask a question here, man. Like
I could talk to you guys all day, and I am a bit of a chatty Cathy when it comes to these topics. So please talk to me, ask me a question.
I have so many, and I just like hearing you talk about all these experiences that you've had. Thinking about writing the book specifically, what was one of your, or I guess actually what is one of your like most proud moments of it? Whether it's the whole process or the book itself, the writing, any of it.
Wow. No, my most proud moment is getting to know John and working with him, and learning more about autism. As we said about children and adults too, neurodiversity, no two people are alike. They may have, they may be autistic, they may be gifted and autistic, or gifted with ADD, whatever it is, everyone's different. But I felt like I really gained such insight, knowledge about being on the spectrum and how your life operates on a daily basis, different from a neurotypical person. I'm so proud that he entrusted, like you said, Matt, he trusted me. And the two things he said to me from the get-go was, I don't lie. He said, autistic people have a hard time lying. And I went, it's interesting. And as I read more, I went, okay. He said, I don't lie and I don't like being disappointed. So don't tell me something that's going to happen and then don't follow through. He said, my mom was like that when my brother and I were growing up. She would kind of dangle these carrots, like, you get this done and then we'll do this. And then it never followed through. He goes, but just, the way I'm wired, I don't like being disappointed. And I said, I can promise you I will never lie to you. And I will never disappoint you. What I say is going to happen is going to happen. And so I really looked at John as one of my 2E boys that I worked with and broke things down into small steps. We broke this book in after it was like we had the outline and then it's chapter by chapter, and we're both good with that. Then we talk about the chapter and break that down into small parts. So that's a strategy. He said, gosh, I wish I'd had that when I was a younger kid. No one knew really how to work with me. And because I was so smart, I could work above grade level and no one really thought that I struggled with anything. But oh my gosh, these gifted kids do struggle with things academically too. And then they get to the point where they can't maneuver out of a situation because of their intelligence, and they find themselves in a really dark, deep hole. And he ended up, and I've read this, and I've met some kids like this too. They get to college and they end up dropping out. And he did. He never got his degree. And it wasn't because he couldn't. He probably could have gotten a medical degree, but he didn't have the strategies in place as a young adult to get there. He didn't know how to handle all the copious amounts of reading, the writing, all those things go with being 2E, and young boys that I worked with. So he just wished that had kind of been turned around a little bit for him, but he's not regretful of anything in his life. He's been super successful. But Jake, back to your question, as I get off on tangents, he has been my proudest moment. He is a new friend and a lifelong friend. And I just will always be so grateful that he trusted me to tell his story.
That's incredible. And also, like, I haven't read it yet. I'm going to once it comes out, but it sounds like you pretty much like perfectly captured not only the relationship between the two of you, but also his essence. I think that's just phenomenal.
Well, I appreciate that. He, a lot of people could approach you and say, I want you to help me write a book about my life. And I really wasn't interested in writing another book right away, because my first book had come out and I was doing some work with that. And writing takes over a year, if you're on the good side of that. And sometimes it can be 2 years or more when you get down to editing and blah, blah, blah. But I couldn't resist myself. I just went, John, and he wasn't just telling me the upside of his life. He was telling me some really dark places he had been. And so when I heard, like, oh, wow, we're getting the good, the bad, and the ugly, to quote a Clint Eastwood movie, he really did in the first few meetings. And I went, I'm in. I am all in. I don't care how long this book takes. We're going to write it. We're going to do it. Special man.
And I mean, we all get to see that as people who read the book. So tell me then, Deb, like, what do you want people to take from this? Like, where do you see this book moving the field forward? Like, what's that vision for you?
Well, as I mentioned a moment ago, John and I really would like to see a few things happen. One is people not be afraid of the term neurodiverse, to really educate individuals about what that means. And if we just really understood that a neurodiverse brain is an amazing thing, that what each individual is capable of if we gave them the opportunities. They want, neurodiverse people want the opportunities and they go for them, and then they smack these walls where people just don't understand neurodiversity. For example, I go in for a job interview, I get hired, and in 2 weeks, I'm being called in to my supervisor, whoever, and they're telling me I have to, watch how I'm working or what I'm saying or the way I'm doing it or the way I get frustrated, whatever it might be. And they're wanting to fix this individual. And I've dealt with this with kids as well. Some teachers want to, it seems like they see the child as broken and they want to fix the child. And that is not it at all. So something that John and I really want to make clear is to help more and more people understand what neurodiversity means. It just means a different brain. We're all different, but it's just a different brain. It's a different way of feeling things and thinking about things. So that's number one. Number two is if the world got a better understanding of what neurodiversity meant, then that's going to change the way hiring practices are for neurodiverse people. As in schools, and this has been what's been so great about my first book and this book is they parallel so beautifully, because if we change the way that we see how we need to work with children, success is going to be everywhere. Happiness will be everywhere. And I know I sound like a Pollyanna, like everything's going to be just great. But if we change the way people are interviewed, do we allow them the opportunity to sit at home and do the interview? Well, because of the pandemic, more and more of that is happening. Or can you provide me the questions before I go to the interview? So I can prepare myself because I need more time to think about it instead of going in and doing the interview and then someone hits me with a question. And because of my neurodiversity and the way my brain's wired, someone's going to think, well, I don't know that they're a good fit. They're kind of reading into something that's not there. So again, understanding this person's just wired a little differently. It's not bad. It's actually great. And changing the business, employment culture, business culture, and then stemming back down to schools and the way individuals think about neurodiverse children and how they operate instead of just one size fits all. We must change the dynamic of the way teachers are trained and provide for these kids in all kinds of different settings. And again, I don't want to hear, well, we don't have enough time, we don't have enough money. I taught for over 40 years, and you can make it work. You can make things work on a dime if you really try hard. And sometimes that's what happens. People don't want to really put in the effort and time, which is unfortunate. Same in the hiring process. Well, if I hire this individual, it's going to cost me a lot of money to change their desk and their lighting and move them over here and let them go home at noon for 2 hours and la, 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 la. So it's just really about educating people, which has been my whole life, educating.
I mean, I can't think of anybody more perfectly situated to do that. And I agree with you. I mean, as I do more neurodiversity consulting within jobs and employing, with HR and stuff like that.
Yes, HR, right.
People will say, it's like, well, I mean, if I give it to this person, I'm going to have to give it to everybody. Good. I mean, if you build a ramp into the building, we don't have to worry about the stairs. If you allow people to be adults and say, hey, I'm going to work from home today because I got a repair guy coming.
Yeah.
What's the difference between that and somebody who suffers from migraines or a cerebral palsy,
right,
or who's dyslexic? I mean,
absolutely.
We are asking people, we're asking the people in charge.
Yes.
More people, not only what they need, but what they deserve. Right. And that's why we do the work we do, right? We're out there, we're going to knock on all those doors until they open, because everybody deserves to have an environment that fits them.
Right. I encountered a principal at one of my schools that, she was all about this, equality. All the kids should get, in the school should get everything the same. Fair is not equal, equal is not fair. She was getting into all that dynamic. And I just went, oh my gosh. My gifted students were working on a project-based assignment on peregrine falcons. And I live in the Cleveland area, and there's a pair of falcons that nest on Terminal Tower in downtown Cleveland. And there was a nest watcher who actually started a program called Raptors in the City, which was fascinating. Long story short, gentlemen, one of my students, as we're learning about the peregrine falcons and how the population came back after DDT was outlawed or illegal in the United States, he saw the name of this gentleman on one of the photos I was showing. And he goes, well, Miss Gennarelli, why can't we have Mr. Wright come and talk to us? And I said, I think we can. So I reached out to the gentleman. I found his phone number. He lived in the Cleveland area. And he said, well, and this gentleman, now that I know more about neurodiversity, this gentleman was neurodiverse. He goes, I really don't like to come out and talk. He goes, but I see that your kids have really studied the falcons a long time. So I feel like they'll ask me a lot of good questions. And I said, you have no idea. So he came, but I had to notify my principal this guest speaker was coming. Well, little did I know that just offering up that I have a guest speaker coming, she immediately shut me down and said, why aren't you inviting the speaker to talk to the whole school? And I said, well, for one reason, my students have been studying peregrine falcons for like 6 weeks now, in depth. They have more knowledge about peregrine falcons than the average Joe. So I said, if you would like to have him come and speak to the student body, that's great. But he's coming to my classes. I'm gathering K through 8 gifted kids who've been studying this. We're actually 4 through 8. And she said, no. What do you mean, no? And she started emailing up the chain in my school district all the way to the curriculum director, who was my immediate supervisor, getting all these people involved in this conversation about equity and gifted. And I just could not wrap my mind around it, that was happening. And it was a real telltale sign for me that, my work is not done. It will never be done till I can't really speak anymore or write anymore. So, and this woman grabbed this gentleman, had a PhD, highly gifted herself. No, what was that about? I just couldn't wrap my mind around it. So I actually overrode her. I thought, I'll apologize. What's the expression? Apologize after?
Yeah.
To do it and just go, oh, well, I'm sorry afterwards, and just see what the repercussions are going to be. Because I tend to be a little of a boat rocker. And so if you haven't seen that yet, I had him come anyway. He came in the door. He set up his presentation. She knew he was there. And I thought, whatever happens, happens. He's coming. And he did. And it was great.
Yes, for forgiveness, not permission.
That's it.
Jake, I think we have our next swag shirt, and it's the Noon Podcast Boat Rockers Welcome. I
love it.
We are all boat rockers.
Yes.
I mean, nobody up in this field who's like, well, gee, the status quo is just fine.
Never.
Right?
Never.
Yeah, no. One of my favorite comedians is Catherine Madigan, and she goes, yeah and no. Someone will present something and she's like, no, that doesn't make sense. I'm going to speak up about that. So yeah, no. I don't care if you have a PhD, you're in the superintendent. No.
We can't all know everything.
If this were your child walking into the classroom, I'm sorry, Jake, what?
I was just saying, we can't all know everything.
Yeah, right.
And there's this, I think, foundational to all the work I do, whether as a speaker, as a therapist, as a consultant, is assume good intention, right?
Exactly.
Even the administrators who are getting in the way of our kids doing what they need, I don't think they wake up in the morning and twirl their evil guy mustache.
Absolutely not.
Right?
Absolutely not. That's what caught me so off guard, that, this particular district was very supportive of their gifted students and the services they provided. So their identification practices, their services were spot on. But I hit this one snag, and it really just sent me reeling. I couldn't believe that we can't let the general population feel like the gifted kids are getting more than they deserve. And that takes you back to educating individuals about how gifted students need in-depth study, and they need different kinds of rigorous work compared to the workbooks and the basal readers and all the things that are just, they're not even appropriate for neurotypical kids, but neurodiverse, they need something different.
And the field at large is lucky to have you banging those drums and having those arguments.
Thanks.
I think I say this at least once per podcast, but it's easy to say when it's true. And there are thousands of kids who are going to benefit from the buttons you've pushed and the doors you've pried open. I mean, we can't take no for an answer.
No.
That's so cool. All right. So, even though we could absolutely keep talking because
No, I know. I love this.
I want to learn more about peregrine falcons.
I know.
But so we will wrap up the podcast with our final three questions.
Mhm.
I'm going to ask one, Jake's going to ask one, and then we'll give you an opportunity to send our audience home with a message. So I'll start. Deb, if you could have any superhero on speed dial, who would it be and why?
Oh my, that's hard. Oh, that's so hard.
I am a hard-hitting journalist.
You are a hard-hitting journalist because there's so many superheroes I love. I'm just going to go out and say Superman.
Yeah?
Although he's got his kryptonite, and my kryptonite is, when people present to me as that principal did, that gifted kids don't need anything different. They're the same as everyone else, and we're going to keep it all equal. And that's not fair if you do something different for them. And these kids over here don't get this. And that's my kryptonite. And that's when the superpowers come out. And I put on my cape and I go forward, and I want people to listen and learn. And that's what Superman did. He wasn't going to, the bad guys come along and he's going to, take care of them. But he's also a very kind soul, when he's Clark Kent, he's a very kind soul. And I think I'm a kind soul.
That's a great answer. And I mean, it's tough to go wrong with Superman, right? Not only for his power, but for the person he is. And that's,
well, that was hard because I'm a feminist, and I'll just put that out there. And I'm thinking, oh, Superwoman, Batgirl. I'm like thinking all these other ones, and there's so many great ones, but Superman.
to redirect this to the gifted world for just one more second. Like,
Yeah.
if Superman is the raw brain power that our kids have, we also want them to be good people like Clark Kent.
That's correct. That is correct.
If he wanted to be.
That's right.
But, he's humble.
Yes.
And he listens, and he's a good coworker and a good friend. And I think that's really what, more so than the power, I think that's what really draws people to Superman.
I agree. That's why I said, as a human on Earth, when he's presenting that persona, he's such a good soul. So yeah. But he's out there to fight the good fights, right?
Absolutely. Jake, your question?
I have another fun one for you.
Okay.
What's your favorite word and why?
Oh my gosh. Well, now that you asked, if you'd asked me that 3 years ago, it would have been different. But now I'm a grandmother. So I guess one of my favorite words now is Gigi.
Oh.
And my 3-year-old grandson, Milo, calls me Gigi. And when I hear that, I melt. All the people I've worked with over the years who became grandparents, oohed and awed, but it's like most things. Till you walk in those shoes, you just do not know. So I guess, Jake, today, that word would be Gigi.
I love that answer. And I also am curious about what...
Gifted grandma. There you go.
That's what it stands for.
Actually, it's Grandma Gennarelli, but, I didn't want him tangling up with Gennarelli right now. So Gigi.
Gifted grandma. I think it's fitting.
Gifted grandma.
Yeah.
What would the 3 years ago you answer?
Well, you said favorite word, right?
Mm-hmm.
Favorite word. Passion. I'm a really passionate person and intuitive. And, like I said before, when I'm all into something like writing this book with John, I'm extremely passionate about it. And sometimes that passion is misconstrued when I talk to people. And I had a quote. I'm a big Ruth Bader Ginsburg fan, and my daughter gave me her biography, and I was reading it. And, there's a quote in there about, you want to bring people on board. You want to be passionate about something and bring them on board, kind of fight your cause with you, so to speak. But you can't be so aggressive in their face that it turns people away. And I thought, wow, that's pretty powerful, because in her time, Ruth really fought the good fight, for so many causes. And I feel like I'm doing that in Gifted Ed and Twice Exceptionality and Neurodiversity, getting out there and fighting the good fight. But I want to bring people on board in a passionate way that's kind and caring, and not a grab them around the throat and shake them,
Like, why don't you care about this thing?
Right.
as much as I do, right?
Yeah.
Why don't you care about this like I do? It's so important.
Pay attention.
But there's so many things to be, involved in today. Gosh, wow, we could go on forever, but passion, just be passionate about something. Get involved, make a difference.
Be as passionate as our gifted grandma.
Yeah.
Gifted grandma. And you know what? This is so funny. Real quick. Matt, you asked superhero. I have a t-shirt. I should have worn it today. It's Snoopy with the cape, and it said, my superhero, what is it? My super talent is teaching gifted kids. And I found it on Etsy. And so I wear that from time to time, even though I don't teach. But it's Snoopy with the mask and the cape, and it's like, my super talent is teaching gifted kids. So yeah, how about that? I just remembered that. So Superman was good.
That's awesome. Well, I'm so excited to hear what you want to leave our listeners with. So take us home, Deb. What's your parting wisdom?
My parting wisdom. Well, first of all, thank you, Matt and Jake, for having me today. My parting words, I guess, would be that if you want to understand neurodiversity more, which just means your brain thinks differently, then Google it. Just briefly Google it and see what you find out about it. It's not something to be frightened about. It's not a bad thing. It's a great thing. And if we think about individuals, I'm just going to pick two off the top of my head: Tim Burton and Steve Jobs. Both those gentlemen, Steve is now gone, but definitely neurodiverse. And Tim Burton, oh my gosh. So if you just stop and think for a minute, if we didn't have their creations, think about what we'd be missing, right? So if we think of it in terms like that, then the whole world would be a better place if we accept everyone's way of thinking. So after you Google very quickly, like, what does neurodiversity mean? You certainly can pick up my book and John's book. It's on Amazon now, and learn more about his story. His is unique. Everyone's is unique, but it will give you a little bit of insight into an individual who has not had a straight, smooth path in his life, but because of his neurodiversity and his passion for achieving the goals that he set for himself, he's created businesses. He's been in the Army as an Army medic. He's taught in a TUI high school. His background in working is as diverse as he is. And it's a really motivating book. So if someone was feeling like, I'm neurodiverse, but I don't feel like that, I feel like every day is a struggle. It is a struggle. And John will share that with you in his struggles, but it will also shine light and give you hope that starting with small goals, working with your passions. What are you good at? He's good at startup companies. He's good at working with high school kids who are like himself. So finding paths like that really make a difference. And then if it's individuals who live with someone who's neurodiverse, you definitely would want to read this book, because from the point of view of people that have been his friends for long periods of time, his wife, his family, it's really quite interesting how he navigates that. Wishes again that schools knew about him and how he thought and processed earlier. So for parents that might listen to this, thinking about, oh my gosh, well, this gentleman is now an adult. My child is kind of like that. And I'm heading into these stormy waters, thinking about, how do I work with schools to get what my child needs so they're a little more successful and can go through high school, go through college if they choose to, or go into the military. I couldn't believe John went in the military and the Army. I thought, you're autistic and you were in the Army and throwing bombs. And I'm like, what? Jumping out of helicopters? So all things are possible. That's what I leave with. All things are possible.
That's a phenomenal thing to wrap up this podcast with, and really the message we want all of our leaders to take with us all the time. So
yes.
For the fabulous Deb Gennarelli and Jake Noonan, I'm Dr. Matt Zakreski. Thank you for listening to us here at the Nerding Out on Neurodiversity podcast. We had so much fun today, if that's not abundantly clear, but we always think it is. And we hope you tune in to hear us next time. So for everybody here, thank you. Jake, you want to send us out?
Yeah. It was phenomenal. I'm so glad we got to talk to Deb. And the one thing I do want to make sure that we do again is tell everybody what your book's titled as well.
Right. Not small detail.
Yes. The book title is Navigating Neurodiversity, My Journey as a Twice Exceptional Adult. The publisher is Gifted Unlimited, and it can also be found on Amazon and other book retailers.
Well, and we'll throw that in the show notes and we'll link to it and all that good stuff. So
Thank you, Matt and Jake.
Deb, you're a delight. You're just so awesome. And this was an incredible episode. We're so excited. We will talk again soon. Take care, everybody.
Absolutely. Take care.
Nerding Out on Neurodiversity is brought to you by Dr. Matt Zakreski and the team at the Neurodiversity Collective. To learn more about the Neurodiversity Collective or to be a guest on the podcast, please visit our website at www.theneurodiversitycollective.com/podcast. Audio and production by Jake Noonan. Show your support by subscribing, leaving a 5-star review, and telling your friends about us. Our Instagram and social media handles are at #NoonPodcast, NOON podcast. Your support is appreciated and keeps us going. All discussions presented on this podcast are strictly for informational purposes, awareness, and understanding. The advice presented is not and should not be considered to be therapeutic in nature. If you have any mental health questions, please contact your provider. All rights reserved.